Hi, it's Warren Huart. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm sitting with the wonderful Ben Grosse.
Pleasure.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. Now we're in the mix room where you told me earlier you've been since 97.
97.
That's pretty amazing. So enormous amount of records that you've done and you've mixed here.
And also other people have, this has been an open commercial facility the entire time.
That makes sense because I'm walking down the corridor and I was looking at all the gold and platinum records and I'm thinking to myself, I know he did that one, but I don't recognize that one. So I didn't know you were using it as a commercial facility as well.
That's why I'm still standing the other way.
So you're still running multiple. That's fantastic.
We've got Lil Jon in tonight.
Really? That's great. That's truly fantastic.
In B.
Now, I have a sort of theme when I interview people. I love the gear talk. I love the stuff. I love knowing people's journeys. But we have the same manager, and I asked him for your information and he manages lots of great people, but the people I admire are very eclectic. Now, you've recently had a massive run of great, huge rock albums over the last 10 or 20 years. But I first know about you, I think in England, from a Debbie Harry solo record.
Sure.
And to me, that's the kind of stuff I love, because the guys I admire, we haven't talked about people we admire yet, but for me, it's like obviously like the George Martins. But in England, it was always like John Leckie, because he did the bands and he did.
Well, I used to do a lot of fixing and mixing for Warner Brothers specifically, which is how Debbie Harry and some of those things came about.
That's great.
Where I would do single mixes, and sometimes they would use single mixes, the remixes I did as the actual album versions.
Fantastic.
So that song, I Want That Man, I mean, we're going way back, but that one.
My age group.
Yeah. That one was, they when the record was turned in, they knew that was a single, but there was something not quite right about it. They wanted to make it a little more palatable for American radio, maybe a little more guitar action on it, which is what was happening at the time. And that one I did, and they liked it and ended up throwing it on the album.
That's fantastic.
So that was the main version.
So how did you, because that's fairly early in your career, how did you get to that point?
Well, I sort of came at it from two angles. I started in Detroit, and I was doing a lot of the funk records and a lot of the techno records back at the birth of all of that.
Right.
And so that was one side, and then I was doing rock stuff on the other side. And then eventually I started getting attention for both of those things, and it all coalesced. So fantastic. I was doing remixes for Juan Atkins and Inner City and all the the Detroit house and techno bands that were
the Inner City song. I can't remember what it's called. It was quite a big hit in the
UK. There's Big Fun and Good Life.
Good Life.
Yeah. And I believe I mixed Good Life.
Great.
And that was a massive hit. Not here, but
I remember in England. Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of work. I got a lot of work in the UK because I was doing all this stuff that would end up working over there. Now, for a time, there was a moment in time where all the British bands were doing synth stuff, and when they wanted to bring them over to the US, they would say, "Oh, we need some guitars on it." So, for some fortunate reason, I got called a lot to do guitar versions of these bands.
Fantastic.
So I would just take their synth stuff and put guitars on it. One of the perfect examples of that is this band Republica had a song Ready to Go. So and that became the version because it was a synth track and we put I put guitars on it and redid it, and it was a complete rework. And then
that was a great song. I'll say I remember at the time there was a lot of bands like Garbage that were getting signed, and none of them broke through. And the only band that broke through as well was Republica.
Yeah, then that was not just in the UK, but that was maybe not so much in the US, but all over the world. That was a massive
song.
Yeah.
I remember.
And then the tides turned a little bit, and all the Brit bands were doing guitar records. And for some reason, which I just count my lucky stars, they were sending them to me to put synths on them. So, which was great. And then I just, after a while, I used to do a lot of remixes and reworks. I just decided that life was too short and I needed to just actually work on records, not work on fixing up other people's mistakes or doing a treatment so it would get on this radio format or that radio format.
Sure.
So then I just figured that was better for my health and better for my career. So I just started focusing more on producing and just mixing actual albums, not reworking things.
And how did that segue? What was the sort of the record that
I think the first Filter record was probably one that sort of set that course, which had Hey Man, Nice Shot on it and a few other songs.
Yeah, that's a great song. So then you started going a lot more into rock.
Yeah. Well, but I had always done a lot of rock. I just got known for sort of things that were a little more eclectic. And then the Filter record was I mean, it was a big record, but it was a very specific thing, and a lot of people wanted that kind of sound.
Sure.
So all of a sudden, the perception was that's what I did.
Well, the thing about the Filter record I loved at the time was it definitely had the hint of grunge, so it was going to be relevant for the period, but it definitely had a massive amount of kind of industrial in it that just made it jump out of the speakers.
And it did, and I got lucky because a lot of the my contemporaries got sort of caught up in success with the hair bands, and all of a sudden there was no work for them. And fortunately, I was working on some of that stuff because we all work on everything because we were trying to make a living, but I never really broke through with that. So by the time Filter came around, that was post that, and there were a lot of that was sort of Nine Inch Nails had already set the tone.
Sure.
And a lot of things going on. So it worked.
It's a wonderful
out
sounding record, and I think it's a great being able to blend genres, which is I'm sort of picking up as a theme. Being ability to be able to blend genres and being open and eclectic in all this ways allows you to go wherever you want to go.
Yeah, it's not always that easy because you get pigeonholed, but yeah. And also I had because I did so many reworkings and transitional, no guitars, let's put guitars. I got really good at working with really heavily layered stuff. So
sure.
So I started getting a lot of work with that too, where there's 20 tracks of guitars, an orchestra, lots of synths, whatever, and making it all, carving out little sonic landscapes for it so it could all get heard instead of just being a big mess.
And I think that's still a very difficult thing to do.
Nothing is easy.
Yeah, but that balance, it's to me, it's still like the thing that I look for most is because everything at the moment is very obviously dance, EDM, whatever they want to call it, but dance music orientated. And then when I hear them bringing in rock, a lot of the time it doesn't really work for me. It still sounds like a rock track with some synths added to it, or a synth track with some guitars.
Well, now I actually just finished mixing a record that is sort of combining EDM and rock. It's the new Starset record.
Nice.
Which they were primarily a rock band on their first record, but they've sort of morphed into more of an EDM thing just because they want to branch out, and there's a lot of side chaining and things sort of pumping like happens in the EDM world.
Now, are you doing that? Are you staying in Pro Tools, or actually, I haven't asked you, what is your DAW? I presume it's Pro
Tools. Yeah.
So, are you staying within the DAW, creating that stuff in there, and then, or are you doing it using a console?
Well,
hybrid world. I suppose.
It is a hybrid world. Yeah. Sometimes certainly side chaining and things like that are way easier to do in the computer. So, but all the tools are still here. So I've created a way of working that makes sense to me, where I can work fast and still have what I love about the analog world.
So brings up a question. When in the late 80s, when we first started doing like dance music, and we would take, I'm sure you've done this 1,000 times, take the hi-hat and use it to trigger a gate on the guitar. And you get that kind of
right.
But the great thing about it was, of course, the hi-hat was a live drummer, so it breathed.
Right.
So my question would be, are you looking for ways to kind of, is this a word, organicize, to make,
that's a really good question, and it depends on the pressure I'm under. Because if I've got to get from point A to point B as fast as possible,
right.
Avid makes a plugin that does that. I don't even have to get a hi-hat. It just has a triggering gate thing that just makes everything go cut. I'll just throw that on it. But yes, I remember I was doing a mix for New Order back in the day, and we used to use the Roland sync box, and you could see the tempo. And a lot of the bands, you would look at the tempo and it would be 104 BPM for the song.
Sure.
And when the New Order song came in, I loaded up their sync box data and looked at it, and every beat was different. The entire song was 104, 106, 108, 107, 103, 105, 104, and it just kept on going. And that was them, whether they took it through an envelope to do that, or they just sort of randomized it somehow. when I saw it, I went, that's how they it's all machine, but it has its own feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there was a device, and I'm just thinking about it, in the late 80s. Oh, the human clock. You remember that? I don't know who made
Vaguely. I don't know if I used that thing.
Yeah, I just remember seeing it in music stores, and I think
I like to think of myself as the human clock.
Yeah. So I think my question is like, how do we bring in that random element? Do you find yourself looking for some random elements to?
I mean, I do, but that, back in the day when electronic music started really taking over, things would sound too mechanical.
Sure.
Now we're all used to mechanical, so it's organic stuff sounds weird sometimes. So it just really
agree.
depends.
I remember the first time I heard Cars by Gary Newman, I thought, wow, this is like futuristic music. And now you put it on, it just sounds like an organic band with a synth in it.
Right.
Or Sweet Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that first time that came on the radio, in fact, it still does it to me, hair standing. It's just, when that track comes on.
Well, it's also an amazing song.
Amazing song. But great synth sounds. And it sounded so robotic, but in a good way, futuristic, Blade Runner or whatever. And now you listen to it and you hear a human being playing.
Mm.
So you're right. It's sort of like our ears are tuned.
Yeah, remember when the first big song was the Human League song, Don't You Want Me?
Huge.
And everybody's like, it's a new era. Everything sounds mechanical. And people were freaking out because it didn't have a human feel to it. But when you listen to it now, it definitely has a human feel to it. Yeah.
What was the album? Dare. Yeah, great album.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's incredible. You say, I always say this, so excuse me for the people of whom there's no substitute for experience. So it's an amazing thing that you've grown through all of these genres, that you've got this sort of knowledge of synthesizers, guitar world, blending it together. It's no surprise that you are here now doing this. Pretty fantastic.
Yeah, there is no substitute for work.
Yeah, that's gonna be a lot of people leaving that comment. No substitute for experience equals no substitute for work.
Right. Work is freedom.
Work definitely is.
We'll work.
Oh, sorry. You're like, you just ruined my mix.
Here, these two faders. That fader you can play.
Didn't they used to have them like, maybe you could assign them. So we're going
the old VR and then V3s had it where you would use these buttons and you could do it with the entire width of the console.
Oh, I see.
But anyway, this is my SSLK, which is sort of my baby. This is the room I mix everything in, and I've had this console in here since about 2003. I had a J in here before, which is now in Studio B. And when I got here in '97, that's what I put in this room, and then I swapped it out. Got this when they started making these.
Beautiful.
And I love this thing. It's really more a control surface, but it's got a good grind to it. Not like the 4K, but it does have a thing. And I just love how tactile and automated everything is.
So with my 4K, I'm always going EQ into compression. That's sort of the sound of the 4K for me.
I do that as well. I have most of the compression on the console on channel out, which yeah. But I don't use the compressors that much on here because they don't sound. The 4K compressors sound really aggressive and have a thing. These are a little more friendly. So in order to get that kind of aggressive sound, I'll compress outside of the console.
Do you have any sort of favorites? Compressor wise?
I mean, I've got, so many things lying around. I have the old DBX 160s. I've got, I've got the 1176s, got it all. And there are a lot of Pro Tools ones I like, but I don't want to start getting into all that. But I've got distressors here.
Sure.
Got the Neve 2254, which I love.
Where are you using the 2254?
That I'm using on the bus right now.
Oh, so you use this on the master bus?
Yeah.
In conjunction with the SSL?
Uh-huh. But don't tell anybody.
Too late. That's nice. I mean, to me, it's a little, I suppose, 70s and spongy. Do you use it hard, or are you using it for all the transformers and everything?
I use it. I just sort of kiss it a little bit and make the meters go. But I like it's grimy and spongy. I like the dirtiness of it.
Marvelous. I thought there's a Joe Meek sitting above it.
Uh-huh. I use that on drums. I have a lot of compressors. I have use stereo buses to go to 4 or 5 different compressors for drums, and then just depending on what I want, just play them like an instrument, turn them up.
Oh, so you're blending on the fly?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fantastic. Are you finding that for recalls, are you printing stuff back as stems so it's easy?
No, I don't. I should, but what I do, I've sort of devised a system that works for me, at least on every album. I may change it up, but the gear I won't touch that much. I'll touch it a little bit, but if I want to change the compression level, I'll change something on the console, which is completely recallable.
Right.
So recalls are a snap. It's not in the box, but it's still not. I don't have to reset every knob in the control room.
That makes sense.
I've got a black version of the 33609.
Oh wow, I've never actually seen a black version of this. Did you have it as a favorite sort of setting?
My setting is it's off right now, but that's just because I'm not using it right now. But I like this thing's really aggressive. I like the sound of that one better just because it sounds more vintagey to me.
Right, absolutely. I definitely find this definitely make this a little spongier than I would with I suppose I hate the word spongy. What's the Elvis Costello quote talking about music is like dancing about architecture?
Right. Well, actually, I think he stole that from Frank Zappa.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. Zappa probably stole it from somebody like Duke Ellington or something.
I don't know. Zappa was a pretty creative guy. It sounds like something he came up with.
Oh yes, Zappa really is.
But I mean, I've got a lot of outboard gear, but I've also gotten rid of a lot of outboard gear over the years because it's just sitting around.
Right.
And it's worth a lot of money. So I can always buy it back, but I've gotten rid of more stuff than I have.
I find that with increasingly going to, I mean, you've actually got more outboard than a lot of, purely commercial studios.
Well, you could call this a purely commercial studio, even though it's my studio, but
right.
I've got this room locked out for a while, but we do other things in here.
Fantastic. The SSL.
Using that for drums as well.
Right. Nice. And then the Valley People.
Love those. Those are really hard, aggressive compressors, the Gain Brains.
You got any favorite sort of things you're using them on?
I use them on toms.
On toms. Oh, right. That makes sense. And then I remember these DBX 900 series. I had one of these a long time ago.
Those
gates were like fun.
Those are good, but I use them for de-essing, but recently I've gotten more into sculpting the de-esser threshold with automation, so I do a lot more of that in the box these days.
Sure. I feel like we were talking about earlier, de-essing in gates is where, the fact that you can do volume automation so easily, it's like, for vocals, for me, I do a lot more automation on it there. So I understand what you're saying. Now, the 160s?
Drums.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Now, the TG1. Is there a favorite sort of?
I love those on snare drums.
I've never used one on snare drum. I'd love to hear it.
It's got a crazy setting on the back. You can flip it to limit mode, and it distorts, and it's really nice.
Right. So it just kind of gives some energy. Yeah. Do you blend that in a parallel fashion?
Yep.
You blend it parallel. Right.
Well, it depends. Sometimes I'll run a snare track through that.
Yeah.
Straight and just on insert, and sometimes I'll parallel. It just depends on my mood.
Right. Wonderful.
Fatso drums.
Nice.
Distressors I'll use on vocals, but I'm not using them right now. But I have them in my vocal chain often because I can get some flexibility and change sounds with them. But they're there. I mean, there's always usable things to do with them.
Yeah, I need to get a pair of distressors. Whenever I go to the studio, they have them, but they're so flexible.
Well, they're relatively inexpensive and they're flexible, and everybody knows them. So it's sort of like having NS-10s. You just expect them as part of the outboard gear in a commercial place.
What's this underneath here?
Those are cheap compressors that I use for drums.
And you're using those just for a specific sound?
They're very harsh, which I love. I'm using them on rooms, and I use them on a parallel bus.
Wonderful. Some 1176s.
I use those for parallel vocals.
Parallel vocals?
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes I'll just slap through a bass, but now with basses having so many different tracks now, that I do a lot more of that kind of stuff in the box.
Right. LA-2As?
LA-2A is sort of my go-to just for soft vocals now. I mean, I use them for all sorts of things. I've had them forever, and they're the originals.
Right. I personally never really loved them. I started on 1176s and 160s.
Well, these are really friendly. I mean, they're really soft. So on bass or vocals, they're not the only things to use, but they definitely can give some glue.
Great. Yeah, mine is probably broken at the moment, so that's probably another reason why. What is this?
That's an NTI EQ. I use that on my master bus.
Beautiful. I don't know that company.
It's a passive EQ. It's really nice, and it's all resettable. So I use it like a mastering EQ.
Oh, wonderful! And then a lovely selection of Pultecs.
Pultecs I use on vocals and drums. Isn't that really the only important thing in a mix? Vocals and drums.
I've probably said that about 10,000 times. Guys that work for me, it's like if you've got a really great drum sound and a really amazing vocal, you can have an out of tune guitar and people think it's cool.
Right.
Isn't it strange, We're going to have a lot of conversation about that, but it's, you may well be right. So you swap them around, or you have a favorite place for each one?
I generally use the EQP ones for vocals and the EQHs for drums.
Right.
But this one is one that I've had since the 80s, and it's broken, and I don't want to get it fixed because the low end, it just turns volume up broadband. It doesn't turn the low end up, and I can't get that sound with anything else. So when you put it on 100 hertz, all the volume goes up, but it distorts a little bit. So I leave that one broken, and I just use it for that.
Oh dear. Hopefully it stays broken in the right way.
It has. It's been years.
It's been years. Okay.
Yeah.
I won't touch it. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I just have multi effects that I set up for to have at the ready. I basically use these 4000s to have different effects ready to go.
Are you finding that you're staying more in the box with multi effects?
Well, no. I mean, I use these.
You have a lot.
I have 3 of them that I generally use for multi effects, and they're not in the box. And then I use this one just sort of to have a stereo harmonizer at the ready.
Beautiful. Nice collection of PCM42s.
Yeah, I love those things. I mean, there's so many delays that sort of replace those in the box, but I still have those at the ready, and I can just grab them. And
are you bringing them up on fader on console, or?
I bring them up on small faders.
Small faders, right. I think also for you, do you find that because you've grown up using a console, you also like the tactile feel of being able to blend it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's always been a problem for me, is writing automation on delays and stuff like that. It's, it just doesn't feel the same. So I can totally understand the console feel there. SPX, a 1090.
That's nothing. That's just a placeholder.
Oh, placeholder. Oh, a Drawmer. Those used to, that was the gate, wasn't it? That really was the gate. Like, he made amazing gates. So as we were saying, we've got all the Eventides here.
Yeah.
Now this is beautiful to see an AMS.
Yeah.
The original, the beginning of digital world.
Yeah, that's how we did drums in the 80s.
Right.
With the triggering, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, they brought out their first, I can't remember, someone's going to correct me, but I feel like 76 was the first digital delay they made. They were like the birth between them and obviously.
Yeah, but it wasn't until the 80s where they got the lock feature, which all of a sudden made it, opened up a whole new world to us.
Absolutely. Well, I think of New Order and Joy Division, I think of.
Sure.
Of the AMS. And then
those 3 things are the Roland 3D stuff that sort of came and went in the 80s or the early 90s.
I didn't get to use one of these. You have to tell me about them.
They're great. I mean, one of them's does short delays, one of them sort of long delays, and one of them's a reverb. It uses phasing, and it actually creates these wide sort of things that when you listen on little speakers, that goes way outside the speaker range.
Oh wow!
Like I'll do like in the beginning of Hey Man, I Shot. I use that when you hear the guitar grindy noise sort of going. If you listen on NS-10s, it's way wide, it's way out. That was that.
Oh, fantastic. Now I'm going to go back and listen to it. Maybe we'll listen on the car on the way back. God bless modern technology. I'll be able to do that. SansAmps?
I use those for bass distortion and whatever distortion, but that's one of the effects that's the in the box version is so close to that that I like that. It's one of the only ones that really competes with the hardware version.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been in standard in Pro Tools since I don't know, I want to say 90s.
Yeah.
And it still sounds so good.
But I like them, and I have this one too, which has way more low end, which is one of the original ones. These just don't have the same low end. This was the analog version of it.
Oh, I didn't
and
know
for
this.
bass, if I want to add some low end and distortion, I like that guy.
Great. And this, yeah, I've never seen one of these. Beautiful. That's just about to shoot up in price on eBay. And SC70s. I do remember those.
Love those.
Yeah, that's
more
great.
multi-effects.
Ooh.
That is a Loft flanger.
Oh, wow.
One of the first pieces of outboard gear I ever bought.
Yeah.
But that's I don't know if that was it or if that's a revamp of it, but yeah, this is a revamp because the original one had API knobs on it. I had a few of them. Just good analog flanging.
Right.
Nothing sounds like it.
Fantastic.
Doesn't get that much use, but it's there.
It's there if you want to have some fun.
Somebody smashed a knob on it. So.
Yeah, that's an inevitability of a studio, unfortunately, isn't it? Wheeling in gear. What's the Yamaha underneath?
That's a Rev 7.
Oh, what is a Rev 7?
Just don't use it that much. It's a placeholder.
I remember when that was the thing.
Yeah. And these guys are the Korg A1 and A2. I use those for distortions. I use
you do?
Drum distortions and things. Yeah, they're just sort of multi-effects, but they have interesting distortions.
Oh, wow. I would never have thought of using that for that.
See, it's got a distortion thing and a compressor. You can sort of...
And these are just... Cloudtenic was such an incredible company.
Love those.
I remember the reverbs, their graphics. I mean, they were just unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
When we were kids in England, this was like, woohoo, the holy grail of
those things sound
stuff.
great. I mean, they really, for just, and you can buy them used now for about $1,000. They really sound nice.
Yeah, great company. And what is this?
That's a space station, Ursa Major space station.
Wow, I've never seen one in the flesh.
That's it.
There it is.
I use that on snare drums.
Wow, I've never seen one in the flesh. It's always been the sort of one of those little Holy Grail things. So it's hidden down here.
That was the first digital delay I ever bought.
Wow. And is that the one?
That's the one.
Wow, you kept it in great condition.
I think that's the one. Yeah, I'm pretty...
That's beautiful.
I had a... they don't look like that now. The knobs aren't metal like that.
No, I didn't recognize that at all.
So that's... Remarkable. I mean, that is from the 80s.
Nice.
Early 80s. I'm only 17, but... I bought it in the early 80s.
I'm 16. So, talking, when you said NS-10s, I, of course, quickly glanced over to see them. So, NS-10s and the V8s. What do you find yourself living on?
Well, the V8s are new. They let me try them out, and they're real. I've been looking for... I've lived on the NS-10s, and because it's my room, the TAD 2-ways in the soffits I grew up on those, so I've been in here 20 years, so I know them both intimately. I've been looking for something that's in between, and I've tried a few things. KRK were nice enough to set me up with these, and they've been working out really nicely.
Beautiful. I have a lot of friends who love them.
These are the brand new ones. I mean, they're just coming out now. They've changed them. They're all digital now, and they've got dip switches where you can control a lot of things.
Interesting.
I didn't use the old ones, but these were a revamp of those.
Have you had anything else living there with the NS-10s?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try different things. I had some ocean waves in here that were really interesting.
Great.
They've got a one that are about the size of this.
Sure. What are you driving the NS-10s with, do you know?
A Pro.
I don't know.
That's what I'm driving everything with. That's my amp of choice in the whole building.
Oh, wow.
They're defunct now, but they were made by cowboys in New Zealand. They're really nice.
Wonderful. No, I only know the Bryston, I suppose, and people.
That's sort of the standard NS-10 amp.
Wonderful. And I'm assuming, obviously, the V8 would be self-powered.
Yeah.
So, which is really the present and the future, isn't it? Everything seems to be self-powered these days.
It's handy.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good for people if they're going to move from one place to another. They can just turn up with the speaker.
You didn't go over my rack of power and doom.
Yeah, rack of power and doom. Well, let's start up here. We've got some got a little lunchbox here. Oh, the Focusrite.
Yeah. That's just a mic pre.
And then some 560s and 550Bs.
Yeah.
Are you using these on mixers?
I'm using this on these both on snare drums, just different snare drums.
Great.
But I'm, you can see I'm barely touching this guy, just being gentle.
Nice. Yeah, there's something about the toughness of, I don't know how to describe it. I remember tracking and mixing on an SSL, and I couldn't get my bass sound back, no matter what I did, even when I poured out the EQ and everything and just let it go back through. And I spoke to Shelly Yakos, and he's like, put an API on it somewhere. And it was amazing. There's a hardness to APIs that sort of like toughens it up.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find that you don't have to do a lot because a lot of it is putting a signal through it?
Yeah, to a degree, but also, I mean, I just, with this guy, I like to carve the middle out of snare drums.
Right.
And this one, it's basically just adding a little bit of lows, probably like what you did for your bass.
Yeah, exactly. Well, wonderful. And now we have another Eventide.
I've got them all over the place.
Yeah, I hope they sponsor you.
No, as a matter of fact, they're the opposite, quite the opposite. I don't think they want anything to do with me.
I don't know. I think you're selling a lot of Eventide here. And is this?
That's a new one.
Yeah, I hear.
Somebody in Detroit is making them now.
Yeah, that's what I hear. And
it's okay. I mean, those things have always been sort of weird to use. You just got to stumble on the right thing, and you don't know how you got it.
Yeah, so. Exactly. I think I had that even when I was at Vintage King. I had that conversation. It's like people tell you the Compex is the greatest thing ever, and then you go, and for the first hour, you're like, "Are you crazy?" Right. And then, whoa, what happened? Right, it's amazing. Right, don't touch it.
Right. So that's sort of what I've got on it now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I won't touch the knobs then. But yes, when you get them to sound great, they're unbelievable.
Yeah.
But,
and this is all Neves, except for this is a Wonder Audio, which has which is a 1073 type. It has a much more buttery low end.
Lovely.
That's why I put it in there.
Beautiful. And you're using these as well as EQ and these are sort of like combining the SSL EQ with it as well. Great.
Yeah, I mean the SSL EQ is more for when I need EQ. These have a sound.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, add a couple of extra transformers, or I suppose in this case,
my default is I'll run the main rhythm guitars through these, and I'll run vocals through these, and I've got a kick drum going through that. Right. I've got a snare drum going. I've got a couple of these, but one's not in here right now. I've got a snare drum going through that.
Fantastic.
So again, the important things.
Yeah. Well, you got guitars going through as well.
Okay, well,
Speaking as a guitar player.
Important things plus guitars.
And then all the playback stuff.
Yeah.
Good old DAT tapes. There they are.
That wall doesn't get too much use.
No, I haven't used my CD player in the longest time. Let alone crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. And well, wonderful. Should we go to Studio B? Let's walk through and see the live room. Are you good there?
So this is the live room for A, better known as the ping pong room. Perfectly shaped for a ping pong tournament.
I mean, it's nice and live.
It is. And this curtain can go up and it gets livelier.
Yeah, I mean, these days it's actually quite a big drum room. Most places I'm going now, drum rooms are like a half the size of this.
I still cut drums at other places because there's so many great rooms to cut drums in town.
And probably 24 channels of Neve or something as well.
Or I bring stuff, but
stuff.
Depends on where.
I'm assuming that's the mix room logo.
It is.
Nice. So this is Studio B?
This is Studio B, which has the J, which was the original console in A.
How long did you have this before you moved it?
I had this from 97 to 03.
03.
So basically when this was paid for, I
Swapped it
bought
over.
the other one, yeah. A lot of people love this room even more. I mean, this is a much smaller, tighter room. You know, the same monitors, but they're right in your face.
Fantastic.
So it's basically the same design, just sort of a much more compact. That A is a complete Vincent van Hoff design.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, this
Wonderful.
This wasn't, but I had Vincent come in and we changed some things around and he worked on it, so it was a hybrid.
Lovely.
But he definitely blessed the room.
Good.
While he was still with us.
Amazing. So outboard, a lot of beautiful stuff.
Yeah, similar vibration.
You're representing Eventide heavily again. We've got PCM 60 there. Wow. My earliest memory of Lexicons would be 70s. So
the PCM 60, that's a New York thing. Everybody uses that on kick drum. It gives the short reverb for kick drums.
60. Yeah, I didn't grow up using those. TC Electronics.
Yeah.
Nice delay.
That's the original Loft that I bought.
Oh, wow.
I don't even want to tell you the year I bought it, but that was the first piece of gear I ever bought.
It was the first piece of gear you ever bought?
First piece of gear I ever bought.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. The API knobs on it. Those are great. War 42s, H3000s. I have that exact one, the blue one. I love it. I only have one, so I find myself stemming out. I print vocal effects back in.
Sure. Well, that's why I have lots of them. So
yes. That makes sense. The Delta Lab, Super Timeline. Don't know that.
It's just a little flanger of kind of another box of the same ilk.
Great. Another A1.
Yep.
Korg A1. Over here, Drawmers.
Yep.
Great. And more AMS. Wow. This is a classic RMS 16. I have one of these. They're beautiful.
Yeah, so basically the same thing as an A.
Rev 5, SPX 1000, 330, SPX 90. Are you still using SPX 90s?
I use the symphonic program a lot on it, which just spreads things. But I kind of stopped using them when they started breaking a lot.
Right.
And it was you can't really fix them. It's cheaper to buy them than to fix them. So I just got lazy about it.
Yeah, they are pretty inexpensive now. Standard live, even to this day, though, I go to most live venues and you look over to the engineer's rack, and it's always.
Well, they're easy.
Yeah.
And this API, these are all original APIs. Those are not Bs. Those are all the.
Oh, yeah. The original with the red on off switch. Whether is that for the.
I don't know. The red lights never worked.
Well, Clark 10X, another SansAmp.
Yeah.
The EARs.
Yeah, those are in lieu of Pultecs. They're basically, they're much different than Pultecs, even though they're designed like Pultecs, but they sound amazing.
The blank plate.
Yeah.
Although it could be, a Funkerator, know. Joe Meek.
Yeah.
I think I like using these because you could drive them.
Well, this is a newer one. This one doesn't drive. Sound the same as I have the original one in A. And this, I've never been able to get this one to rock like that one.
Okay. Yeah, I think we had ours like mid-90s or whatever. So maybe that's probably what your other one is in there. Now
that's more of those really nice compressors, the cheapy ones.
Yeah, those people like those.
Yeah. And then that LA-2A is it's not the universal reissue, but it's a run they did in I think it was the 80s. They made some of them to original spec.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's not an original vintage one from the 60s. It's from the 80s.
I've not ever seen that like that. It's really cool. Got a nice still.
I think they only made a run of about 200 of them.
Oh, wow. DBX 160X.
Those are, I just have them around and we put stuff in here as needed.
They're kind of fun though. They're much maligned. I know guys that use them.
They sound nice for bass and vocals. I mean, they're really, set it and forget it kind of boxes.
These are actually favorites of mine because I engineered and worked with Dave Sardi years ago, and that was his guitar sound.
Well, I mean, these sound and work very similar to LA-2As. If you don't like LA-2As, I'm surprised you like these. They're just a little, they're solid state versions of that.
They still have a little bit of a spankiness to them on guitars. You can get the Rihanna kind of, you know what I mean? Get a little spankiness that the LA-2As, I just didn't grow up on them. And probably just price-wise in the 80s, England, I think, sort of moved really quickly over to SSLs, and it was a little slower over here, but we sort of abandoned some of our really good stuff and it got taken over here. Like, there's hardly any Neves left in England anywhere. And yet all over LA, there's Neves.
That's just because the market went crazy. That stuff just got so ridiculously expensive.
Oh,
even the copies are expensive.
Yes, it's very expensive. So anyway, yes, I do. Yeah, I'd have to do a comparison and see what I could get out of it. But I've always loved the LA-3As. And those, though, when I moved here in the mid-90s, you could pick them up for like $300. Now they're vintage.
Yeah, those days are gone.
Those days are gone. Another pair of 160s.
Yeah.
And then some more 900 series.
Same deal.
Great.
And then some of the original 1176s as well.
Well, this is a great mix room because you've got a lot of outboard. Like I was saying, these days this doesn't happen that much. I got a lot of rooms where
this is a commercial facility, so when people come in, they're expecting there's a certain amount of gear, whether people need it or not. It's just expected. Like the AMS stuff, maybe people won't use it, but you don't go into a commercial studio without seeing.
I think it's also nice if you're like I won't say young and upcoming, but maybe somebody didn't grow up with this, to go to a room and have it be available. Especially if you've got a good assistant. They can go, hey, you should try and... Because I don't know about you, but when I go to new places, I'm always asking the assistant who's been there for 20 years.
Right.
Especially when I'm tracking. Like, who's been in? They'll say Joe Ciccarelli. Oh, where does he track drums? Oh, over there.
Right,
that's where we're tracking drums.
Sure. That's a more cut and dried thing. But as far as outboard gear preferences, that's a little more esoteric, I think.
But it's nice to have...
Sure.
Go into a room and have somebody that can, because I'm always learning. I'm definitely not an expert.
When you might as well just stop working in this business when you've stopped learning, because that's that's what makes it worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always learning. I mean, I've been doing this forever, and I am constantly learning, constantly refining.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. I love that. NS-10s, are these the same wall ones? So if you get super busy, somebody else has booked out your main room, you come and work in here?
Yeah, that's the idea, although I've pretty much have not worked that much in here in the last year or two, but yeah, this room is set up so I could, when that got busy, I could come in here and work.
Right. Are you finding you're printing stems?
I'm not printing stems. Everybody else is, and my other guys that work for me here are printing stems.
Yeah.
But I'll do it if I have to, but it's just easy for me to throw a mix up and deal with it.
Right. I'm just wondering, from the point of view of these days, we're getting asked to do so many versions of everything.
I just do a lot of versions now. I know I'm not typical because stems make life a lot easier, but it just takes so much time to do stems, and then I always find the one thing I can't change, I have to go back and put the mix up.
Sure. It is interesting though, because stems, I don't know if your experience has been, sometimes I find that it pulls back up and it actually feels kind of nice because, they've all hit the bus compressor in a different way. And then other times it's absolutely dreadful anyway, because even if you have, 12 sets of stereo stems, it's never hasn't hit this the same. So they don't gel.
Are you side chaining the mix without the compressor to the compressor when you're running your stems?
I haven't tried that. It's a wonderful idea. Yeah, it's a wonderful idea.
That makes it so your compressor does the same thing every stem that you run.
There you go. There's a smart piece of advice. See, not only am I learning, I'm double learning. That's really cool. The one problem I had once, I'm not going to say what it was because it was a relatively big mix. We recalled a mix from stems from another studio. And again, studio remained nameless, but it had a really, really light 12K going in it, which was not a problem in a massive mix, but when it's printed 12 times in stereo, we're pulling up in mastering and we hear this 12K squeal going on. My assistant's the first one to notice.
I was going to say, I don't think I hear that anymore.
Well, I think he was like, what is that? There's like this whistle, and we were mastering and we just slowed it down to half speed and we heard this clear 6K,
Right, that's what you got to do.
And what had happened. It had bounced through this other console, and yeah, so what it is like, you know, if there's any error there, it's going to be amplified 12
So
times.
what did you do?
We had to rebounce it. I had to figure out what the problem was. Yeah, it was too big of a song to ignore. You know, it was and not that, you know, you should ever ignore something like that, but it was like a deadline.
You couldn't just flip the phase on half the stems and hope that it goes away.
Find 12K and flip the phase, and then yeah.
Well, in theory, if you had 20 stems and flipped the phase on 10 of them, it would go away. But
yeah, well, yeah, but the relationship between one sound and another would change, and you know, you understand all the potential things. But that side chaining thing, that's fantastic, and I had not thought about that. He's a smart man. So let's check out now.
I think I probably stole that from somebody.
You know what? Who said it? Shostakovich, or I can't remember. Sorry, somebody else correct me below.
Probably Frank Zappa.
Probably Frank Zappa later, but it was an older composer that said, "Good artists borrow and great artists steal."
Right.
So let's check out C.
Okay, so come on this way.
Oh, that way. Is this your old studio?
Yeah.
So I see this name.
That's from the first Filter record.
Where is it? I saw a studio name on here. Am I looking at the wrong one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Pulse.
That was my studio in Detroit where I mixed the first Filter record.
It's beautiful. How long were you in Detroit?
Forever. That's where I grew up.
Oh, it's amazing. And you see, being English, you can probably tell, you know, from our earlier conversation.
Here's the
growing up on the Stooges and stuff. Everything was Detroit for us. There it is. We were talking about that earlier.
Notice the country that the award is from.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's a big deal in England. In '88, 250,000 actual copies of a. You know, considering our population is a sixth the size of America. Yeah, it's amazing. And what was the other one with the British flag? Oh, the Republica.
Yeah.
It's platinum in England.
I think that's just the gold version.
The gold one, yeah. And in England, they still do a silver as well, which I think is fantastic.
That's what I thought this was, but I guess it's not if it's 250,000.
No, if it's 250,000. I don't know what that is.
I have a silver one somewhere from England, but
yeah, because
that's like half gold. Is that what silver is?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it'd be strange because, like, if you think about it, there's not many singles in England that have sold 1 million copies.
Right.
So if that's platinum, that's like 10 songs. I mean, nowadays, obviously, with digital, maybe it's more. But when I was a kid, it was a huge deal that Mother Kintar sold over 1 million. The Bohemian Rhapsody had sold. These like certain songs were like, when you hit 1 million, it was huge news.
Of course.
So 250 is massive.
That's like hitting 10 million here. So, so this is a little production room. There's a Pro amp, by the way, if you want to see what it looks like.
Oh, Pro. There it is. So you got a Caprice here as well.
Yeah.
You got the Dragon, some control surfaces. So, I mean, this is probably a modern studio for many, many people.
You know, a lot of people this room is just configured for what anybody needs. We can roll multi-track machines in here, whatever, but a lot of people like working in here.
Yeah, it's a good size.
People rent this out by the month.
That makes sense, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tries to rent it out for, a year or two.
That's happened.
Yeah, it's that sort of like where we live in Hollywood, in LA, these kind of is what everybody wants.
Eminem used to have this room. He would slept under when there was a console in here, you'd sleep on the floor right there.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. With that, do you find with the Detroit connection as well, because there's so much great music in the last few years come out of there, find people are seeking you out?
Well, I did. I mean, I've been sort of ensconced in Los Angeles for so long now that that's sort of gone away. But back in the day, I had Kid Rock and Eminem here at the same time working on the first albums.
That's great. That's great.
That's just some of my keyboard modules that I have just stored here, that top box.
Oh, these are fun. These are MXR compressors.
Yeah. Those are great.
I can't remember whose studio at the other day. Oh, Cameron Webb. He had a pair of these as well. He loves them. Yeah, probably just fun. Aren't they essentially? I think he said that they were basically pedals in a rack.
Yeah.
So they sort of have that pedal feel about them.
I think he may have seen these here 15 years ago.
Really?
I think so. I don't quote me on that.
No, it might be. Yeah, Cameron's a great guy. So when they're going back in A, you had the pedal up, and I was joking about it being on the master bus. What were you using that for?
I run vocals through that.
Oh, you do? And you like blending that in parallel underneath for a bit of the edge? Nice. He's like looking at me like, you're telling everybody all my secrets. Yeah,
now there's no reason for me to work anymore.
Yeah, sure. I think it takes a little bit more than that. It does take some ears and decision making.
And patience.
And patience. Which in this digital world, not many of us have. Oh, there's Lady Gaga. Was that mixed here?
Yeah, they mixed that and mixed half the album in A.
Great. Is that the first filter record?
That is.
Yeah, there it is. Still beautiful when you can get it as a vinyl. There is the Inner City album.
300,000.
Yeah, that's platinum.
Yeah. I guess it is.
Yeah, that's platinum. Yeah, it goes, I believe it goes 75. And strange enough, it's either 50, 100. I don't know if it's 150. It's a weird equation, but that's definitely platinum. Which would make sense if you've got countries like 1/5 or 1/6 of population, but it's only a third.
Right.
It's a big deal. So you can do guitars here.
Yeah.
Great. Marshall cabs. And this is your vocal booth, is it?
Uh-huh.
Great.
You can cut drums in here too if you want, if you're so inclined.
47?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Bought that in the 80s.
How much was it in the 80s?
1100.
Sorry, how much?
1100.
1100. Oh.
What's it worth now?
I mean, low side 12, high side 18, so 15.
It's in great shape too.
Yeah, 15 probably. And if you've got some good, name-droppy vocal people on it that sew on it, I'm sure you can get the higher end. It's just, that's the way it is. So yeah, so this is what we were just talking about. You're using for parallel on the vocal for some distortion. Sorry, you were saying you still have a tape machine?
I got rid of all the tape machines except I kept one Studer 24 track because I have an 827 that is in spectacular shape.
Beautiful machine.
And to me, that was the apex of quality multi-track recorders. The 2 tracks I got rid of, they're worth a lot of money. They're worth as much as the 24 tracks, the ATRs.
I think we're in that world now with a lot of equipment where, probably like old cars, you sort of sit there and go, the maintenance cost factors into their value.
Well, and that is certainly the thing about consoles, aside from the electricity costs, is that, it costs a lot to keep them up.
Yeah. I find with my SSL, though, it's probably hanging on by its fingertips. It's a 4000, so it's old. But, maybe don't quote me on this, sorry. But it takes a lot of abuse. It really does.
Do you have moving faders?
No, I don't have moving faders.
The moving faders just wear out and they're really expensive too. But I find them used. So SSL will swap you out one swap for $750, and I'll have like 10 go down at a time.
Oh,
so, yeah. So
yeah. Well, they've moved so far away from this so rapidly in the last 4 or 5 years, which they're an evolving company and bought by Peter Gabriel. So it was. To me, when I wanted to make records, I wanted to make, when I first started to make records, I wanted to make records that sound like Peter Gabriel.
Right,
records.
Of course.
If the 70s ones, those first Sutter records, before its huge 80s success, still are some of my favorite sounding records. So while we're on it, I love the Detroit connection. As we were just talking about, everybody of my age group, if you're like 40, probably anywhere 40s or 50s in England, would have grown up listening to Iggy Pop and the Velvet Underground, You know,
Velvet Underground were not Detroit.
no,
but,
they were
yeah.
New York, but that period, to us, it's like, you know, the Detroit and the New York scene, those two scenes are what created punk rock for us and new wave, hands
Sure,
down.
you had MC5, the Rationals, all those
Oh, yeah.
Detroit bands.
I worked with Wayne Kramer, and that was like a big deal for me. And I, frankly, nobody else in the room except for me knew who he was. And I got him to sign my guitar, and he, my son's guitar actually, and it's like Joe Perry and Brad Whitford and Wayne Kramer. It's like, to me, it's, you know, I always say, remember that movie Train Spotting?
Mm-hmm.
That soundtrack is like, that's the soundtrack of every kid of my age group. You know, it was New York Dolls and Velvet Underground, Patti Smith from New York, and then, as you said, MC5.
Who Patti Smith later became a Detroiter.
Oh, did she?
Yeah. Well, she married Fred Smith from the MC5.
Ah, you know, I should have known that. Probably did in my childhood brain. Getting too old.
So she became Patti Smith.
Patti Smith.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, New York and Detroit of that period, it just really influenced the whole British music of the mid to late 70s. You know.
Yeah, I found that when I started getting out in the world, that people in England were very cognizant of all the things I was working on, more so than outside of Detroit and the rest of the country.
Yep.
And all the techno guys that had careers over there in Germany, more so than the rest of the country. Yeah,
it's crazy because you don't really realize that till you come here. I didn't know that perception, that when I came here, that I would have kids working for me that didn't know who the MC5 were, or didn't recognize Iggy Pop's vocals on the radio.
Well, Iggy Pop is one thing. MC5 were I mean, you know, MC5 sort of came and went in like late 60s, early 70s, and then they were done.
Sure.
Iggy's been, you know, has had this incredibly long career.
It's the Bowie Association, obviously. And Bowie's probably the glue for all of that for a lot of English people, because he, obviously Lou Reed and Iggy Pop were, you know, he was instrumental in, at least in England, bringing their career to the forefront.
Yeah, and he was influenced by Iggy in fashion and all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, everything. Yeah, and he wore that on his sleeve and openly admitted it.
Yeah,
which was great. Yeah, so that's fascinating. And then of course Detroit, you've got Motown, so you pretty much knock it out of the park. You know,
and I had a chance to work with a lot of the Motown people that were still left around when I was growing up, and there was a lot of infrastructure there and a lot of amazing musicians. And I was working at studios, assisting and learning in Detroit, and they were all Motown people. It was great.
Oh,
we'd actually set up a 7-piece band and record it live, and you would have it isolated and on tracks, but everybody had performed live and played off of each other.
That's a great baptism of fire.
Yeah.
That's a good way to start with the cream of the crop. I years ago, I was a staff producer on one of those TV shows, and they wanted us to do a Motown mashup with some modern songs. And Motown is ingrained in our soul. The tracks are unbelievable, but I had never been hit with that realization harder than when they brought in a wad of like 40 pieces of A4 paper, and I went through like, you know, 30 songs or 40 songs on each sheet, and I'm like, I know every one of these songs. I know every one of these songs. I know every. It's just insane.
Mm-hmm.
Motown, it's probably the one genre, gun to your head, that, you know, you could say song-wise it just dominates. Unbelievable. And it had a lot longer reign than I realized. Because it has all of the Stevie Wonder and all of the Commodores and Lionel Richie. So you've got all the 70s covered, as well as all the obvious 60s stuff that we all grew up, you know, singing.
Well, but the 70s stuff, while it was still Motown, you know, that sound and style had branched out. So there was maybe 10 companies that were purveying those wares.
Sure.
Where in the 60s, it was just Motown.
It was just Motown.
Everything was emanating out of Detroit.
That's amazing.
But by the time the Commodores came around, it had all moved to LA.
Right, of course. And Stevie did Songs in the Key of Life, in quite a lot of it in Sausalito at the record plant. I remember being there and hearing stories and things. But that's so as a kid, you're growing up in such a musically.
It was amazing, just like rock, like hard rock, exciting rock, and like great songs, Motown, just R&B. That was just great players, great songs. It was a great time to be coming up in the world.
That's pretty amazing. And did you play? Were you a player?
I was a drummer and I played keyboards, but I was in bands when I was in my teens.
Right.
and just decided that I wanted to be more in control.
Do you have any sort of advice, do you think, how somebody can recreate that experience now, because we don't have those sort of studios and those?
Well, but you still have those sort of studios. It's
Mhm.
it's just about the players, and they're all still out there.
Right.
Just, I think that spirit still lives on in Nashville.
Definitely. If you were doing this again, and you're now 16 years old again, knowing what you know now, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's such a different, back then, there was an industry.
Sure.
It's really tough now, just because sometimes when the going gets rough, it feels like you're making silent films. It's just you're working on things that nobody wants to buy.
Sure.
Especially in the rock world, because rock has been marginalized over the last 5 or 6 years for some reason. It's really tough to break a rock act now. And I'm fortunate that I get to work with some rock bands that are, like I mixed the last Breaking Benjamin record and a few things that are big successes, but it's tough. I mean, I that's a really good question. I'm not sure what I would do if I was a 16-year-old now getting into it. But back then, the world was our oyster.
Absolutely. But it was also, and I think I'm sure you'll agree with this, it was also feast and famine as well, though. It was like, for me, you were playing in club bands and making minimum wage and driving all over the country. Maybe you're one of half a dozen people that was assisting in studios. And then there was like very wealthy people.
I started when I was 17, I built a studio in my parents' basement when nobody had a studio. I had an Ampex 1-inch 8-track. And I never looked back. I was working all the time.
But I think you just answered the question. So a lot of people relied on the studio system and didn't necessarily have the drive to then go off and become independent, entrepreneurial, spirited kind of people like you were. So at 17, you build your own studio.
And I still own a damn studio. What's wrong with me?
I don't. I hear you. But I think there's the differentiator. There's the outlier thing. You, at 17, just started making music and recording music.
Right.
So I think that's still true today. I think the great thing about being online for many of us now, I'm sure you get this as well, is you can mix a record from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the far-flung reaches of the world, which may have happened, because they were a significantly large band. But nowadays you can get access to those people, and more importantly, they get access to you.
No, and as a matter of fact, we do a lot of that. Like Paul Pavo, who's been my assistant for years. I have him mixing projects for me, and we're doing a band from Prague today, and then a band from Denmark starting tomorrow. And because we can stream online, it's like they're here, so it works great.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think obviously at your level you're going to get a lot more opportunities than most people, but those still opportunities are available to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
If you, it's I'm big on that, because I feel like everybody had to move to London in England. Everybody had to move to LA eventually, or whatever, or Detroit had its own scene. But now,
how exciting were those? I mean, London in the 80s, what an amazing place.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
It's still pretty amazing now.
I know, but when I first started going to London in the 80s, and oh my God.
What studios were you working at there?
I worked at Metropolis.
I worked there, yeah. DDA consoles.
I worked on a Focusrite console there.
Remember Focusrite, yeah.
What an amazing building that was.
Yeah.
In Chiswick.
Chiswick, yeah. View of the Thames.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Where else? I've worked at a bunch of places.
Chiswick had a lot of studios, because Ilpert Island was there as well, by the bridge where Pete Townsend was. That west part of London was so beautiful. Did you work at Maida Vale?
No.
There's Abbey Road, Old Townhouse.
I visited a lot of those places, but I didn't work in that. I mean, I worked in a lot of houses. Like I was over there, not in the 80s, but I did a record for Curve, and the singer of Curve is Alan Moulder's wife. So
Tony Halliday.
Yeah. So while I did the record in their house, so I had Alan playing guitar for me. Flood was playing synths for me. And they were both sitting there going, be brutal. Tell us what you want.
You're like, I'm sitting in the room with Alan Moore and Flood. That's awesome.
But what are you going to do?
You're going to be yourself.
Right. Well, I was.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, my friends growing up, my best friend was a drummer for the Sundays. So in the late 80s and early 90s when they were huge, it was like Curve, and the Sundays were sort of playing the same kind of venues and doing shows at the same period. I remember that, but I always remember being a little intimidated, like, wait there, Tony Halliday's husband's Alan Moulder?
Which was, and I said, don't you want Alan to mix the record? Oh, he did the last one. You can try this one. It's fine.
Well, that sounds like a pretty darn good relationship to me.
It was great. I had a good time with that one.
That's fantastic.
Although that record was taught me a lesson. We had spent about 2 months and I hadn't backed up anything.
Oh.
And I kicked the power button right when I was running rough mixes the day I was leaving, and I lost the whole album. Then I got it back with a friend of mine suggested Disc Warrior, and I got the whole album back.
With Disc Warrior?
The whole hard drive just shut down because I turned the power off while it was accessing. This was back in the early days of Pro Tools. I mean, this is
I remember
version 4 or something like that.
Yeah, I remember them telling you if you were in record.
I was in record and I hit the power. I kicked the power thing. It was down on the ground.
Wow.
And I just, this white color came over me when I realized what had happened.
How long did it take you to get the album back?
Well, I got it back. You could tell it was going to come back. We tried a bunch of different things. We called some experts and nobody in the UK could do it. And then a friend of mine here suggested Disc Warrior. So we downloaded it and all of a sudden it started coming back.
Wow. Were you able to reassemble it?
Came back.
Came back exactly as it was? Wow.
It just rebuilt the directory.
That is amazing.
Yeah. I was lucky.
I was working on an album, and so I left my studio. I was working on this album, and I get a phone call from the studio manager freaking out because an intern or an assistant was replacing an NS-10 and had taken the driver out and then put it down and sat it on top of a hard drive.
A lot of people didn't understand that speakers were magnets.
Yeah. I don't think that came back.
That's different.
But yeah, I can't remember who it was I was working with, but they probably had the same experience. And they said, a record isn't backed up unless it's in 3 places.
Well, it's easier backing up these days.
Yes, it is. When things are significantly cheaper.
Right.
Back in those days of hot swappable drives, and it was like 8 gigs was a lot. I remember the 4 gig ones and the glyph drives, and then the 8s and then the 16s.
I have a 20 meg drive out there that's rack mountable that I paid $2,000 for.
Oh,
20 megs.
Oh my God. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, we could reminisce all day.
We could.
And I love talking to you, so I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Please leave a bunch of questions and comments below. If there's some really cool ones, I'll hit Ben up for some answers. You'd be all right thrown under the bus for any?
Sure. You can ask questions about the Tube Screamer all you want. I'll never tell.
Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Thank you ever so much for watching.